Live. See what we get. Okay, we are live. Okay. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back. We missed you last week, but we are back with our Body Integrity Fitness presents our weekly discussions surrounding COVID-19. And so this week I have three wonderful panelists with me, and we are going to get into a hot topic that is sure to ignite some fires on here today. And so we're going to be discussing religion and racial disparities pre and post COVID. We're going to be discussing all of the impacts and different facets of it. We may have to do this in a two-part series because this is a heavy topic to discuss, but we invite you in. I am first going to start off by having each one of my panelists introduce themselves and give a quick bio about who they are and what they do. So I'm going to start with you, Charlom. Go ahead and get started.
Hi, my name is Charlom Wilcher. I am a mom, a minister, a sister, and a friend. I do a lot of social media commentary on various issues that come up via social media, and I really try to hone into enlightening the church with the attempt of pulling them out of a religious mindset, as well as continuing to awaken myself as a Black woman. So that's pretty much it.
Cool. All right, Minister Kwame.
Hi, I am the Reverend Kwame Pitts. Although I am a Chicago native, last year I moved here to Western New York to serve in a congregation. My denomination is the ELCA. I also serve as campus minister for what we call Lumen Campus Ministries of Western New York. That means that I'm a campus pastor on several campuses, and we're also broadening that to community colleges. Also, I've been a faith community activist. I served some time with Soul in Chicago. The Southsiders Organized for Unity and Liberation, and now I'm doing work with Voice Buffalo, similar, both run by dynamic women. Also a mother myself as well, an activist, and working on a degree, an advanced degree, Master's of Sacred Theology at Chicago Theological Seminary, which has to do with a lot of ritual and basically ritual and liturgical action as a way to help with the trauma for people of the diaspora. So thank you.
Okay, Brother Sherard.
Hey everybody. My name is Sherard Jones. I'm a servant of the Lord. I minister at Zion Faith Center Bible Church on 100 and Troop. In addition to that, I am an entrepreneur. I have two primary engagements. The one closest to my heart, I believe, is the one called Viable, which seeks to help to empower first-time entrepreneurs, primarily Black entrepreneurs, because there is a huge disparity between the numbers of jobs that we create, the number of dollars that we create, and that cycle through our community through Black-owned and Black-maintained enterprise. And so I really feel as if I have a mission to impact that. And so I really do that through trying to develop a processed way of thinking to get us from point A to point B. And I really feel like that's tied to my ministry and my work, because I do believe that it is incumbent upon us to provide the resources that our people need, and to be able to mindfully impact the world through the leverage of economic power.
All right. So we're going to get right into it. So I want to just start off by saying I liked one of the questions that that Charlom asked, And I'm going to kind of combine it with what I want to start off, our history, our story. Most of the time, what has been taught to, or what has been taught, but mostly nowadays, what is being taught to our children is that they don't have the full gamut of our history. Like they were barely doing it when we were being taught, but we were living in such a different time when our parents and ancestors, they demanded that we be taught. And so there were a few more outlets for us to learn and be taught. So I don't know if you guys remember that show, Know Your Heritage. And I was actually an alternate, studying to be an alternate on that show for my team. And so there was a lot of history that those teams had to be acquainted with. I don't know if you guys remember, but I believe it was 1390 or GCI. They used to do, for the entire month of February, they used to do African American, our history series, where they started from slavery and came all the way up to the present time. And that was back in the, I want to say 80s, mid 80s, late 80s. But now the name escapes me, but they had a name. But anyway, it was dynamic because it went through our history. So they used to do that. So there was other outlets and media for us to learn about who we are and where we've come from. And so that's been lost. And so everyone else has been allowed to maintain or keep their identity of their culture and their history and their language and their traditions. And we have been constantly told, no, you have to surrender those things and take these other things. And so now we see children that really frown upon activists and leaders such as ourselves who are saying, no, you need to know this, and it's important that you know this. And they're like disinterested. So my question becomes like, well, what does blackness mean in America? Like, is Black only a color now? Because who are we? And how do we begin to foster, because it was already lost, and we're fighting so hard to keep it. And we'll jump into our current state, but I want to kind of look back and look forward. So anyone jump in, chime in.
Okay, I guess I'll jump in. So I think it's fair for us to examine the fact that we weren't only told not to pursue our history, but we were like forced to abandon our history, and under the threat of death, under the threat of mutilation, under the threat of terror, we had our lineages taken from us. And that even began before we even got on the ships to get here. And then when you look back at, I guess, the systematic removal of Black faces from history, even preceding the transatlantic slave trade. So when we go back and start to look at history that purposely denies our presence and purposely, seeks to erase us from important documents, the Bible included, then we have to talk about the effect that has and how systematically we are given to kind of abandon our history in very short intervals. So at any given point, we're always told we can only go so far back into our history to kind of access, our identity and to access our strength. So we're looking at a time in America where, where we're challenged when we look back to the civil rights movement. And then we're told that, we're not allowed to call upon that history, and we're not allowed to align with that identity to say, this has helped to shape the people that we are today. And so if we go back 50 years and we're challenged on what's due to our people from 50 years ago, than any attempt to go back further. So then we say, okay, well, let's go back to Jim Crow. Okay, let's go back to slavery. Okay, let's go back to pre-slavery. At any given point, we're always given a reset that makes our history seem as if it's so limited and as if we're such small people, and we've truly become a remnant of ourselves. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that that's critical, and that, you know, the loudest voices are allowed to define us, to where even when we look at the legacy of Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, as you said in our, you know, prologue conversation, how their narratives have been hijacked, and a lot of the principles that were being taught have been removed and whitewashed so that it's comfortable for the majority society to look back at a past that they can still glorify. You know what I mean? And so to me, I think, you know, who we are is huge, but we've been reduced to this remnant of who we actually are nowadays. And we've become, you know, very reactionary, and we've become a response to the false narrative, as opposed to being the people who say, this is who we are and we challenge you. We instead start our conversation with the false narrative and really try to find a piece of ourselves, you know, in the lie, I think. And we do ourselves a great disservice by doing that, because we deny, you know, the richness of our ancestral power. And we don't call it power, and we don't claim it as power. And so I think that's where we are right now.
Okay, ladies.
Well, for me, Blackness in America is directly tied to being a descendant of American chattel slavery. This is just me personally, I don't roll Blackness per se in America back to Africa, because as a result of being descendants of slavery in this country, we're having a very unique experience compared to Blacks throughout the entire diaspora. So what comes out of that in my thinking is the culture that we developed as a result of that experience, whether it be our religious base, our food, our music, the way we commune with one another, the way we relate to one another. No matter if you are of a high socioeconomic status and educational background, or a lower, we all have a shared experience of the trauma of American chattel slavery. And I think that that's important to know and to highlight, because we're living in a time in America now where there's such capitalization on Blackness that we don't even realize we're being erased. When you look at a lot of the articles that are shared throughout social media, it may say, you know, these are pictures of Black doctors or Black lawyers. Well, when you look at their names, they're first generation African immigrants. They're the children of parents who moved here, and they maximize their experience as they should. But that is the new definition of Blackness, or that's what's becoming the new definition of Blackness. So then what do you do with the rest of the people who are suffering from the results of the breakdown of the family, the results of Jim Crow and all of the things that we've suffered because of our history? We were already like the shoes that built the country, and the way that a society is trying to roll this thing forward, we're about to be not just the bottom class, but in a race class, even as it pertains to Blackness. So for me, it's important to be clear of who I am and take pride in that, because I think a lot of the dysfunction that we have is because we don't take pride in the fact that we descended from slavery. There's so much shame attached to that that we don't draw from the strengths of that to become the people that our ancestors died for us to become.
So for me, growing up, my mother was one of the first African-American teachers in the Chicago public school system to teach African-American history. So therefore, I grew up knowing exactly who I who I was and where I came from. My mother taught me that although we were descendants of slaves in this country, that's not where our beginning was. Recently, my mother shared on social media a picture of my, I think, thrice great grandmother, Amanda Morgan, who was 10 years old when the Emancipation Proclamation happened.
Wow.
So, like, that's profound. And so for me, the curiosity has always been, so how much farther do we go back? Where did the roots come from? And so, like, even my name, for example, I was named for the first president of Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah. And so therefore, there's always been a responsibility for me to actually go out and do the work of my ancestors. So there are ancestors that I know, and there are ancestors that I don't know. In his book, Black Practical Theology, one of the contributors talked about the fact that in our churches, for example, there's a separation between the practical and the academic. And so if the church, especially in the Black community in this nation, has been the place where our people have been more educated and more and given more authority over our bodies, given more authenticity about who we are, then the academic and the practical have to come together. Like I said, I also don't know like how many people of my generation, so I'm Gen X, how many people of my generation were taught the same history as I was. So like when I walk into a room, I know exactly who I am, so I don't have that disparity. So I think part of the problem also too is that for those of us who in this country are not teaching, some of us are not teaching our children our history. So we need to teach all of it, and we need to give them those tools. So when they go into a classroom that's primarily going to be a lot of white people, a lot of white teachers, they can say, no, I know my history. Mm-hmm. And so I have passed this down to our children who have been asking the questions. Where do we come from? How is it? My husband has done a lot of lineage work. So he's kind of his family historian. He's also literally one of the last people left in his line. When his grandfather passed away at 101 a couple of years ago, he became it. So like he now becomes the head of the family. He is the patriarch of the family in essence. So I think one of the huge problems is the fact that we haven't been teaching that. We've been ashamed of it. No, we came from slaves, but that's not who our people originally were. I mean, we were the seed of civilization. We are people of African diaspora. We created a lot of things that were stolen from us. And so once we start recognizing that, and then also not pressing upon our children that you can be literally anything. You don't have to be put in pegging. You can't peg your children. I think that's the other pressures that sometimes children get is that their parents pressure them to doing this, that, and the other because, and again, they fall in line of capitalism. We have told our children very clearly, do something that you love that will make you content. You can't do a whole bunch of stuff that's just going to make you rich quick because there's no satisfaction in it and you're going to feel empty inside. So for us, for my context and for my household, that's kind of how we look at all of the things, and we continue to teach them their history, and we want to push back further because my mother has now found out that there's a distant generation of our family in Cuba. So I'm hoping one day to go to Cuba and actually figure that out. So that, I mean, and so like we all have these tendrils in, like all these connections, like we are the African diaspora. So like for me, that's kind of how I situate myself and how I identify in this world.
Wow, that's amazing because my tendrils are very vast as well because, I am officially of Danish descent because my dad's mom, their family is from the Virgin Islands, but it was originally Danish, right? Before the United States took it or acquired it. And her parents were actually a mixed couple, white and black, right? And so, to know that, number one, I have that descent directly from my family and that we have family on every one of those islands there. St. Martin, St. John, Totopolis, the British Virgin Islands, we have family. And so, it just speaks to the vastness of the damage done with the way that our families were separated during this slavery and during this time, and so much of the traditions and the customs that we lost. But what I find most interesting is how, for me, on a cellular level, how certain things are imprinted from those ancestral lines, and they just begin to come out, and they just come out naturally, and you'd be like, well, where did this come from? And it just speaks to who you are and where you came from. And what I find is it's just so sad of the damage that's been done to our minds, because that's where everything is, right? That's where everything begins and ends, is in our minds. And you have to just say that these people were pretty clever, that they were able to come in here. And yeah, I hate giving them that credit.
I hate giving that credit, but it worked.
But it worked. It worked, because here we stand, right? Mm-hmm. We are so lost and so discombobulated. Mm-hmm. And, we're even arguing amongst ourselves about being, our religion, our Christianity, or what is our religion, because it was all stripped away, And so, we look at some of the doctrine of the Bible, of the word, and we have questions, and because I know I do now. I'm not going to sit up here and lie, because I'll be like, Lord, I got a problem with you telling me to just obey these people that just hurting me. I don't see how that's relevant. And I know I don't know everything, and I know I don't know your plan, and I know ours is very different from one another, but I don't see how that works. And I also don't, it kind of speaks to the depthness of this thing, that people don't be like, eventually be like, see, like, something is wrong here. Like, this is just not right. Like, something is, we lost off here. And so, because I look at, like, so the generational curses that really did travel with us, starting with breaking the buck, that started the division of the family. And so when I began to study the depthness of that, and knowing how our men were basically emasculated and raped, knowing that we come from kings and queens, and now you come down and you a slave. These men and women, they were strong. Like, we are a strong people, and we took pride, and we still do on some level, take pride in who we are and what we represent, and to be emasculated in front of your woman. And then her natural reaction is to comfort you, but then you take it that she feeling sorry for you because of what just happened, when she really just want to comfort you and build you back up. And then you got this division of the family beginning to happen. And so we see that same divide all the way till now, where, some of our men, they view us, we too strong, and we don't know how to shut up, and we don't know how to do this. And then you look at somebody else, and then you be like, they are so passionate, and they are so resilient, and they are strong, and they are kick butt, and they just in your face, and they tell, and it's like, but that's who I am,
So, part of that also started with if you remember, in the 60s, the Mohan report. If any of you all are familiar with that report, because I've done some research on it for my academic and theological work that I've done, it was then when they started putting in the mindset that the matriarchal viewpoint of the family, so for a woman to run a family, was actually against American and moral values. They put that in the report. And it was started by a guy who got his, with the Mohan, look up this, the Mohan report. That actually was a huge part about the splitting of the family. because as you know, in our culture in the diaspora, there are matriarchal tribes. Well, let's be
Yes.
clear, and they still exist to this day. So that's normal and that's natural. But for before, in that report, when they talked about this, that patriarchal was the right way, it was the American way, it was etc. So then that's when men started to look at women in a certain fashion. Our men started looking at us in fashion and say, oh, well, you're this, that, and the other, because they were already being oppressed. And in turn, they did an internalized oppression. Dr. Kelly Brown Douglas, in her books, What's Faith Got to Do with It, talks about this internalized oppression as well. And so I think that's kind of where, like, it already was happening after slavery, after we became free-ish, as we talk about now, because we were trying to be so much like our oppressors, so that maybe they would accept us, so that maybe we could actually breathe. Instead, it drove bigger divisions. And so now we are at this point now where there are all these divisions, and now we're trying to heal from that. And unfortunately, it's a vicious cycle. Like, where does it stop?
Yeah.
It's interesting too, because I think if we just allowed ourselves to think through a common sense lens versus our religious lens, we would be able to solve a lot of the problems that we face. But because of how we practice our faith, we're trying to think about what's right through a biblical lens, not giving credence to the fact that whatever that lens is, it's been handed to us through people who are telling us this is how God said it should go. When, because of how God made us as people of the diaspora, there is an aspect of righteousness and common good that's embedded in our DNA. So we see that play out in natural aspects of our life. And I think that it will work in the favor of our families as well if we allowed that. But because of how we practice our faith, it's a challenge.
It is.
Let me speak to that. I don't know if y'all can hear me. My headphones went out, so now I'm just talking. But I think we really have to speak to, as you said, the lens that's been handed to us. And the lens that's been handed to us is primarily this kind of white evangelical interpretation of the Bible that benefits white supremacy and that maintains white supremacist culture. Because as soon as you say, God looks like me and God wants me to win, and you look like the opposite of me, then it's automatically setting up the mental conditioning to say, I'm on the other side of God. And as opposed to us actually like studying in the word and realizing that God is on the side of the oppressed. God is on the side of the people who want to be free. God is on the side of the people who are being mistreated and misled. And that's who he wants to win freedom for. God is a conqueror for the underdog. And he always chose the people who, were at the bottom. Like when he chose Israel, y'all the smallest anybody. Y'all ain't got nothing. Y'all living in tents. Y'all were slaves. I'm going to make something out of y'all so that y'all know it's me, so that the world knows that it's me. And so anytime you're looking at a dominant culture that's pointing to God and saying, yeah, God wants us to exploit you. God wants us to sell you, buy you, trade you, rape you, do all of these things. So that means you are lying. And so as soon as you set up that lie and set up a structure that allows that lie to flourish, then it gave you the latitude to start to govern our culture and to give us a culture that we created based on the narrative that you gave us. So my thought is always to go back and say, how do we claim our narrative? How do we write our story and align our story to the truth? And in aligning our story to the truth, we got to align ourselves with who God actually said we were, and not who the people who would benefit from the definition that they made up of who God is and therefore who we are, run with. So we always have to choose what we're going to agree with. Are we going to agree with the truth that God gave us, or are we going to agree with the lie that people gave us and put God's face on it? And as a matter of fact, put a white face of God on it that ain't really the face of God. You know what I mean? So we got to get back to the
now truth. I'm going to say something a little controversial. Now we're talking about religion. So one of the things that we were talking about earlier is about our history, correct? So there's a lot of things in our history that We are trying to teach the folks, our folks now, our generations now, trying to make and stuff that was taught to us. There's a magnitude of religions and faith practices as we of the diaspora follow. And part of the issue is that we were told that Christianity was the only thing that would be acceptable in this country to follow. Now, both on an academic and on a personal level, I have a huge interest in African traditional religions. Two, in fact. One is Haitian Voodoo, and the other is Ifa, or what is commonly known as Santeria. There are rites, rituals, and other things in those particular traditions that I think are the key to healing, to beginning the healing. Let's be clear, because there's a lot of trauma we've experienced all over the scale. No matter where you're on the scale, it's there. But some of our, and you spoke about this earlier, Joy, about what Big Ma and others knew, how they knew, what they knew to plant, what they knew to do, like all of that, folk medicine, etc. These are some of the things I think we need to, at this point in time, return back to, because they are the ones that are doing the healing. We have theologians, both Black liberation, womanist theologians, who talk about, like Dr. James Cone, talk about God is on the side of the oppressed. But the problem was, like, some of the Black church didn't want to hear that. But it's very clear, God is on the side of the oppressed. So therefore, we can, if we feel that we are called by God, if we feel that God is in our corner, if we are firmly into our faith practice, then we have every right then to challenge the empire, and we don't do that. We see this now, and this is why I think a lot of folks and generations below us don't feel particularly tied to any faith practice, any religious practice, etc., because what they see is that, for example, they see the church like the world. So we have, unfortunately, many pastors, ministers of culture and of the diaspora who are aligning themselves with very ultra-conservative orthodoxy matters. And therefore, why they're doing it? Follow the money. I mean, let's be very clear. Let's follow the money. And so, like, and we were told that other practices that are more native, that are more traditional for us, depending on where we came from. Okay, so depending on what part of the diaspora that our original ancestors came from, that those are heathenistic, demonic, et cetera, and we have accepted that. So, I mean, and so, like, when I've taken a look at those traditions, I mean, for example, we said we catch the Holy Ghost in church. Our ancestors did the same thing. They were connecting. What's the difference? We're still continuing the practice. So we can't, one of the things I think we can do is we have to embrace all of our history. Even if we don't understand it, and even if we say, I'm full-blown Christianity, this Christianity is the route I walk, that's absolutely wonderful. But we can't shame people who say, you know what, I don't know which spiritual path I walk. I have no clue, no idea. I need to connect with my ancestors. I need to do this. One thing that I usually teach a lot about, and I've had people come to me, is about creating ancestral altars in your home, because regardless of what we've been told, our ancestors are still speaking. And now I think they're still fueling us even further. Like, oh, now y'all actually listen. Okay, now let me play these drums a little louder, so y'all know to go out there and do something and express your righteous race, because all of the protests, the rioting, everything we're seeing, it's literally a manifestation of our ancestors who never got a chance to do that. And they're pushing us because we have to survive. You're absolutely right, Charlom. We have to survive as a people. If we don't, we will get erased. And so we have to take control. We have to do these things now. But we can't shame each other. Right. In the way we do the practices and all the things that we do and how we exist. We have to teach our children and then allow them to be their children. We don't take stuff, we don't make them grow up. There's so much on the spectrum. There's so much internalized stuff that we as people that as diaspora have to deal with first. That's the only way we're going to be whole. But it does also come to religion, because that's something that, Joy, you want to talk about today that comes up. Like, I tell my children, I don't care what practice you do, as long as you know that there is a creator and that you're not alone in this world. So those are some of the, I think, some just the important things, but that's my personal opinion, and that's been my personal experience.
I see you. Come on. I see you.
No. I just wanted to speak to something she mentioned about catching the Holy Ghost. I was watching a panel with Bishop Yvette Flunder a couple of weeks ago. She and Carlton Pearson were on this panel, and they were both Carlton Pearson more so than her, I believe, but maybe her as well. They were children when Bishop Mason of the Church of God in Christ was older. And one of the things that they said was the reason that he introduced speaking in tongues to the Kojic church was because he knew from his lineage that that was a part of African tradition. And I never knew that. And it gave me so much pride. I'm like, oh my God. But even thinking about that, thinking about being a people of the drum, the way that tongues sound and feel, I was like, Lord, in your sovereignty, knowing what we would go through as descendants of slaves, you have always given us these connectors to our heritage, because it would be so difficult to be streamlined to, but especially spiritually. And I just think that that's such a gift.
Yeah, absolutely. And go ahead, come on, Sherard.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback on that on what both of y'all are saying. Particularly, you pointed to saying feeling, and I think one of the things that was done when Christianity was kind of, you know, this evangelical kind of Puritan doctrine was to deny the meaning of your body and the meaning of your feelings.
That's good.
Like connecting with God is supposed to feel good. Like you're supposed to, we're the body of our God. I mean, and when you talk about these African practices and how you see them manifest in the Black church in America, the whole goal was for you to get to a point where you could be a vessel for your God to show up and for God to speak and for God to act and for God to interact with others so that people could feel the touch of God. And so when you start to, again, systematically devalue the Black body and devalue the Black experience of life and say, for you to feel good and for you to feel connected is wrong. And everything that you do to connect, because when the drum's going and when you feel it. And that's the whole point, is for that energy to move and for that Holy Spirit to breathe. And that is found in us culturally. And another thing that we don't talk about is kind of this idea of a diaspora before the transatlantic slave trade. And I say that because I'm talking about the Hebrew diaspora, right? Because they went everywhere. They went to Cush, they went to Egypt, they went to sub-Saharan Africa and carried their traditions with them. So even when you look at the early establishment of even Yoruba dynasties, there were Hebrews present. And so we have to talk about the continuity of the language that we kind of reclaimed as a remnant of people in America, and this continuity of the presence of God in physical vessels. And so we have to claim that and we have to own that and to know that it's okay. And when there's a dominant culture that does not want you to be powerful, the first thing that they're going to do is to separate you from their God, is to separate you from your God. And the first thing that you have to do is to make sure that the God of the conqueror looks like the conqueror, so that I can continue to internalize the power that they have and continue to give my power to them. You know what I mean? And so I'm just agreeing with y'all in the value of us reaching back to even before we landed here. You know, and you talk about like Haitian voodoo and what happened, and what you found a lot of times was because it was the French, right? The same thing like in New Orleans, like the French was a little bit more relaxed and allowed the enslaved people to keep more of their heritage. And so they were able to syncretize it and to still say, okay, this is where the drums have to happen and the chanting has to happen. And we have to be in unison and we have to be in agreement and we have to kind of align rhythmically. You know, and that is still important to us to this day. But what has happened in the adopting of kind of the respectability of majority culture, we said, oh no, we too sophisticated for drums. We too sophisticated to shout. We too sophisticated to dance. We too sophisticated to holler. And you didn't know that you was cutting off your line to your power by doing that. And now you've turned spirituality into an intellectual exercise, which is not what it was meant to be. It was intellectualized by people who couldn't understand the direct experience.
And so you kind of wrote it down and documented it, but there's people who live this every day. That's it.
Y'all are hitting on some points, because I was gonna actually touch on the different traditions of our African ancestors with the voodoo, and we've been taught that it is wrong, and we don't know it, and we haven't taken the time to get to explore it, to say really whether it was wrong or right. Now, there are some mutilation practices, you know, that we in cultures that we do know, and like, I don't agree with the human sacrifice. I don't necessarily agree with cutting off parts on folks' bodies, doing rites of passage and things like that. But the spiritual connection of us and the spirit is one and the same. And one of the things that, you know, as I have been studying and evolving over the time, which is why I say I'm kind of a radical or one of those traditional Christians, because I take the time to listen to other religions and their story and their practices and things of that nature. And one of the things that I say that a lot of people don't like to hear is that the story is the same, guys. There is a God, and there is one who we classify as evil, who has come against God, has fallen away in some shape, form, or fashion. And there is a battle for souls. It's the same story across multiple disciplines of religion, if you just take the time to read it and hear what is being taught, what is being said. I think the division comes amid the practices of how to please that God, or how to pray and how to serve that God. I think that is where the divisions begin to come, because, you know, when I read the word and it tells me that he has sheep of other folds, to me that means he got sheep in other religions, which means that we know Christian, he got somebody in Buddha, he got somebody in Rekya, he got somebody over here, you know, with the Dalai Lama, because the story is the same. And for me, what as I'm exploring, and you know, things can change as I continue to explore, but what I see is that God is trying to, if we're supposed to be in his image and likeness, and we are supposed to be smaller versions of him, little gods, then everything that we experience and everything that we go through in life is to bring us that much closer to him, to pull out any impurities, to make us that much closer to him in how we walk, how we live, how we judge one another, how we treat one another. Because I know some people, I've run into them who have an issue with Jesus. And so I began to pray, and I'm like, well, God, what is the issue? Because, and what they pointed out to me was that God is God. Why does he need a person or a man or another mediary for us to get through, when he rent the veil so that we can have direct contact with him, right? And so I had to think about it, because it kind of made sense. And I just prayed about it. And one of the answers that I got was that because sometimes, well, not sometimes, man is naturally, what is the word he gave me? We're naturally barbaric. It is our nature to be selfish. It is our nature to be mean. And some of us will grow to the point of, and we will recognize that that's not the best way to do things. But the majority of us will not. And so he had to set an example of what love is and what love looks like and what it means to share and what it means to look after your brother and sister and what it means to rightly judge and what it means. Because to me, as I'm reading the Bible, it's instructions and it's examples and it's instructions and it's examples. And there is I'm looking, because then we talk about, because it brings me to the Black Hebrew Israelites, the Nation of Islam. Because I listen to what some of these, I listen to what they have to say, because I really want to know what it is that you're preaching and where's the demonic force in this and where is the misguided. And so far what I've seen through the Black Hebrew Israelites is that they line up with the scripture that talks about the law of the letter and not having that balance in the spirit to match up with the law. And so, because they're very, from what I've learned and seen of them, and of course there's more research to be done, they're very strict on this word. And it's got to be A, B, C, D in the line. And if you messed up, and if you ain't got your fringes on your clothes, you misrepresented and blase skippy, and they still keeping customs as far as feasts and things of that nature. And so, those things to me can be left up to healthy debate or what have you. But for me, where I see is that the law of the letter is killing. But some of the things that they speak, it makes you think. The Apocrypha, people talk about there ain't no lost books of the Bible way. And I say, okay, that may be true, but when you read your word, there are books that are mentioned in the word that are not in the word. So we have to examine that. You can't just read past that. You can't just skim past that.
Well, I mean, one of the reasons why I think we skim that, because it clearly says that God was here for all. And so if anyone says it in scripture, I mean, if you look at in Genesis, the second creation story, and it says God went to God's heavenly council. Now, who is God talking to? Now, let's be very clear, not the angels, because the angels were not considered. God's heavenly council. And so that means that there are other manifestations of the divine that God is in communication with, saying, hey, let's create humankind. And so I think so that's the other thing, like that really, when we talk about God saying that all are equal under God, when we say that really honestly means that's it. So when you look at another person, you are looking at a picture of the divine.
Yes.
That means we're all equal, which then at that point, that literally destroys all of the classism and other things that happens in the world. So people don't want to hear that. So one of the things I remember asking my mother when I was younger, I was like, so Mom, what about these other, like, for example, in Christianity, what are these denominations? And my mother said that there is one God. We as humankind have created all of these different religions, etc., faith practices, as for our culture. So there are different ways of expressing God. And so when I look at that, I said, that makes a lot of sense. I'm not going to tell someone who is Hindu that their religion is wrong. I'm not going to do that. I'm not God. What my husband and I have been doing over the years is we've actually learned about different traditions, different religions, because I want to know. I want to know how is God expressed. There's so much material out there. And really, for my household, we identify as interfaith because there is more than one faith in our household that we all practice. And so, like, something that you were saying, like misconceptions, like you were talking about human sacrifice. So like in Ifa and Voodoo, they don't do that. That's not what that's about. And both traditions really are about healing and wholeness and community, that about being connected with ancestors. These are what all these traditions are about, and all the medicine and stuff like that. Like if something happens, you go to all the rituals, all the healing, everything is about just continuing to be connected. That the veil that parts our world from the beyond is so thin and still there. So, I mean, we have to do our reading and our research. Yeah, it may be strange, it may be fantastical for what but here's the thing, if we're rooted, and I've always thought, if I'm rooted in my culture and my heritage, I can walk into any room and still be myself. It's when you don't have culture and you don't have heritage, you don't know who you are, that's where people get screwed up. And that's where people get frightened. So when they're looking at an aspect like, I could actually be this, either they're going to embrace it or they're going to reject it and be violent toward it.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why I talk about, especially about religion, we had a young man walk into Mother Emanuel AME's church, sat with him for over 2 hours while they did Bible study, they fed him, they prayed with him. And there the truth was revealed. Because I'm sure at one point he realized these people actually were God-fearing, God-loving human beings. But because of everything he'd been taught about how being racist, he's decided that he was not going to let that cloud his vision, and therefore he massacred. The reason why this is kind of important is because that young man was a part of the denomination that I'm a pastor in.
Wow.
And it was that point that the ELCA had to be like, yeah, racism is America's original sin, and we've got to address the racism that is being taught in our churches. Even though there's still people in the ELCA who are like, well, there's no racism. Like, yo, yes, they are. Absolutely.
Wow.
So we have to stop teaching folks that everything outside of a certain denomination or a certain religion is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
No, educate yourself. Go on that journey. I mean, not the Hasidic, no, the Amish. The Amish at one point, before they actually take on becoming actual full Amish, are given a chance to go out and explore the world before they actually commit to being Amish. Why don't we do that in our own culture, in our own traditions? Allow our children to go out and just explore and see what faith, what tradition, where's your path? And if you want to come back and you feel like, no, I feel committed to Christianity, or I can feel committed to being Muslim, or I'm committed to being Jewish or Buddhism, etc. Let them go out and do that. We will have well-rounded individuals instead of people who have a narrow mindset. Because then when they're taught things with a narrow mindset, and I've seen the Black Hebrew Israelites, they are very narrow-minded. Maybe they're trying to accomplish something. I don't know. Not going to judge them. I'm just saying they're very narrow-minded. And in turn, they then flip that, and you have create a whole culture of very angry men, because they're not
Searching for power.
right. There's the power, because they're so scared. They have to have power. We have to serve. In no way, shape, or form, the Creator said we're supposed to oppress others. Our connection to the Creator is through our ancestors. That's kind of how that works. And so they're still speaking. So we still have to, again, go back and lean on those stories, all that oral tradition that we have. I mean, for example, there's a Yoruba village in South Carolina, the only Yoruba village in the United States that continues to practice the ancient ways. People should go and visit them and check them out. You still may come back and say, I'm still fully this, but this is absolutely cool that these are how my ancestors practice and whatever. Just do that, because otherwise you're going to continue to be narrow-minded. And
I just had this thought. Maybe Jesus is an ancestor. Maybe God in his sovereignty knew that our experience as descendants of American chattel slavery would be so disconnected from our land that we wouldn't be able to say, I'm from Ghana, I'm from Nigeria, I'm from Senegal. And through our understanding of who Christ is, maybe he's an ancestor for us based on where we landed and how we live our life. I just thought about that, so I just want to throw that out there. Wow. But I liked what you said about allowing young people to experience the world before they commit to a religious faith. I'm a Christian. My daughter's father was a Christian, but he became a Hebrew Israelite, and now he is actually a leader of his own derivative of being a Hebrew Israelite. I believe it's called Followers of the Way. So what that did for her, it put her in a very confused place. And I was worried initially, but I believe God put it on my heart to just trust him as God, knowing that she'll find her own way and to not force faith on her, because her dad was very strict about no church, no Christianity, you don't worship your pastor, all of these different ideals he was trying to kill that he believes that the church does to Black women. And he was doing it in a way for her to grow up to serve a Black man. But what it did was it made her a feminist, which is also not always a good thing, because I don't believe as Black women, we're afforded the liberty to think like white women do through feminism. But that's
Well,
another
and I mean, and so that's why we have womanism then, like womanist,
right?
Like that's, and so that's what we are. We're womanists. We are also uplifting our own sisters, but we're also uplifting the entirety of our culture, and that's the difference between feminism.
Okay.
I mean that if for folks like, again, Alice Walker talks about that. There are plenty of womanist theologians out there, Katie Cannon, all the way down to Linda Thomas and others. I mean, that's what we do as womanists. We care about our culture. We uplift our sisters, but we also uplift our children, our men, everything. We are fighting for our culture. That's why when women are in these movements now, especially Black Lives Matter was started by 3 women.
Mm-hmm.
Very powerful. So, we're also not trying to say, well, we're higher, because I think that's the one thing in white feminism that I've noticed, that they're trying to push themselves above men. Well, we're trying to be like, hey, we fighting for everybody, because that's a part of our culture. That's what we do, so.
Yeah, I'm just trusting that, because she just graduated from high school. She's going to college in California. So I'm interested to see what her path will be, because it was never, excuse me, it was never something that I forced, but I do believe that there's something there. Yeah.
So I know we're getting close to time, but I kind of want to ask one question. So now we kind of examined, kind of touched a little bit about culture and things of that nature, and we didn't get into it as much as I would have liked, but then we had COVID, which was one thing. And we saw that even in healthcare, there's a disparity, racial disparity. Us not being able to breathe is somehow different than other cultures not being able to breathe. Somehow we can not be able to breathe longer. I don't understand the logic. I don't get it. So we find that a lot of us died because they refused to give us the care that we actually needed, that could have helped prolong our lives and beat the COVID. And then it was compounded by the death of George Floyd. And so I want to ask, what was the difference with his death? Because we've seen quite a few deaths happen. And was his death just the straw that broke the camel's back? Or was it the cavalier attitude of the officer that he could just kill this man and go home and have Chick-fil-A with his family? Like, what was it?
Brother Sherard, would you like to start?
Yeah. Sure. I think I don't have a specific answer to that, but I think when it's time, right? So I think just kind of in the fullness of time, you reach a moment where everything just adds up and just points you to seeing things as they are. And I think just historically, we got to a point where we recognize, you know what, across the board, our lives do not matter. And we keep being brought back to the same place of trying to reiterate the point and say, hey, our lives matter. Hey, our lives matter. Hey, our lives matter. So I think when you took the COVID situation and you saw the disparity in treatment and you saw the disparity in deaths and mortality, and that was clearly along racial lines. And then when you added in the fact that, okay, not only is this disease and the apathy of healthcare towards treating us, killing us, but there are still active murder campaigns being carried out by a militarized police force who still function in the capacity that they functioned in 300 years ago when they were slave catchers, right? So this is all in the DNA of America. And I think you just get to a point where as a people, okay, it's time to speak again. It's time to stand up again. And it's time to assert my life again. You know what I mean? And so it happens cyclically. And I think you mentioned that earlier, that, you know, that we're in these cycles of fighting, you know, to be recognized as people. And I don't want to belabor the point, but again, when we go back to the disparities in healthcare, it's because they don't look at us as people. Like, we're thought to have, you know, these superhuman attributes that allow us to tolerate pain longer and allow us to regenerate from wounds better. And this mythology of Blackness that does not benefit us. You know what I mean? And so I think there's this need for us to say we have value, and to internalize that, and to demand our environment to treat us as indeed the vessels of God that we are. And I just think when it comes time for that, it comes time for that.
Amen. I think too, this was like one of the first cases where everything was crystal clear. We know historically police are able to give excuses as to why they do what they do, but we watched a man kill a man for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And it was undeniable, which made it a tipping point, because even the most racist of all racist white people could not deny that that was blatant murder. So it impacted the world.
Yes, it did.
And because we are living in the consequences of having an African American president, these racial tensions were inevitable. And we didn't know that. We didn't realize there's going to be consequences for having a Black man in the White House. And so with all of these deaths and the way that George Floyd was murdered, being captured on video, it was putrid to not just the nation, but the world. And I'm hoping that we never go back to being the same.
Me too. Me too. Me too.
Good point.
What about you, Reverend Kwame?
So I think I agree with both of my colleagues here. I think the one thing to add is that the fact that he was calling out for his mother in those last moments, and to find out later that his mother was already an ancestor. And so, like, in those moments, like, is that the point where it just cracked? Like, something in this horrible visual cycle cracked, and suddenly, I mean, you know, there's been a meme, like, people have been, like, Black folks were in quarantine and the COVID for X amount of months, and then suddenly this happens and we just erupted. Was it that? I don't know. But I think really it was those last moments, him calling out for his mother. And I think that just shook everybody, and it started something. And so, you know, again, I hope the momentum towards real liberation and real change continues, because that's the important thing. We cannot lose this momentum.
Yes.
Well, I think that, so I could not watch the 8 minutes and 46 seconds. I could not. I watched, I don't even think a whole minute of it, and I just turned it off because I was disgusted. Initially, I was like, why didn't anyone help? But I understood why they didn't help. I understood that every person out there was angry as I was watching that minute, but they also feared for the repercussions should they had jumped the police, which it actually ended up being the exact same repercussions that happened as a result of the murder, which is the riot jumped off.
Yes.
Right? So that, and I could see that was the reason why, because I asked myself, well, what would you have went and pushed him off? Like, would you have had the courage to go and push him off and then have to face whatever repercussion came as a result of that? And then I think the other part, the duality of this momentum, is the momentum within ourselves as a Black people, and asking, do our lives really matter to us? because we have to, I think at the same time, we have to check ourselves with all the murdering that's happening.
But Joy, that's a separate argument.
It's separate, but it's tied in because one of their excuses is, like, I read a feed that a colleague of mine posted, and they're Spanish, and so they have Spanish and white friends. But of course, my Spanish friend, he was upset. And a lot of the argument down this feed was, well, they don't care about themselves. They're shooting themselves every day. They're doing this to themselves every day. So why should we care? And that was like the justification of why cops murder them, is because they murder themselves. So if they don't care about themselves, why should the cop murder care about? And while they are separate, right now they're intertwined. And the way I've been seeing it is that they feel like because we don't have an ultimate respect for themselves, that's why their respect is not returned.
But that's a lie. I mean, the fact is, the black on black crime is just a repeated trope that it's an excuse. Like you said, I mean, murder is about proximity. Like the same numbers of black people that kill black people is the same numbers of white people that kill white people, and Asians that kill Asians, and Latinos that kill Latino. You kill people that's next to you. That's it, and that's all. So if we all together in the same place, then the likelihood is that we're going to wind up killing each other. You don't leave home and drive 30, 40 miles to go kill somebody that don't look like you. You kill somebody that you know that's in your community that has done something to you, or somebody that you know. I mean, and the same, so it's just really a falsehood. And over again, we are sold these narratives that we're supposed to eat. I mean, and so the fact is we're always held to a higher standard. And I get it. We're supposed to value our lives. I agree with that 1000%. We are supposed to value our lives. However, that is not a valid talking point for why white people don't value our lives. We value our lives when we didn't have weapons and we was chained together on a ship. You didn't care about us then and didn't have no problem killing us and doing whatever you did to us then. So no, it is really only an excuse. So, and we got to own that. Like, don't let them hijack the conversation, because that's all that's happening is you hijacking the conversation. And like Sister Charlom said, no, the conversation is about you're killing us systematically, and the system supports your ability to do it, and the system empowers you to do it. That's the only conversation on the table. And every time you try to shift from that conversation is the fact that you don't want to deal with that conversation. And that's the conversation we got to keep in your face. Because if we stop killing each other, you still gonna kill us.
Bet.
True. Oh, true facts. True facts. True facts.
And I just want to say this too. The conditions that we live through, whether it be the violence in our neighborhoods, the brokenness of our families, every form of dysfunction that we are living with and through is as a result of white supremacy. Mm-hmm. And there's no disconnect from that. And then we're then made responsible to somehow heal when this didn't start with us. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't heal. I'm saying that we have to understand that these things were happening to us beyond our own willingness. Yes, I was very irritated by all of the outcry of the looters. That really bothered me, that people, how could they loot our communities? How could they tear these stores down? I said, wait, we live amongst daily death. How could you expect anything differently? We live, you shared a story earlier about conditions of parents and schooling, and these are the conditions we live in. So when there's an opportunity to express derelict behavior, there's a chance you're gonna see that, because that's already our norm. Is it a problem? Absolutely. Do we need to fix it? Absolutely. But it is not connected to white supremacy. Well, it is not connected to police brutality at this moment. We're dealing with the impact of police brutality and racism through these systems, and that's what we need to stay focused on.
Yeah.
So the Reverend.
No, because I love it, because for me it's like, you know, it's like you get to a point where you almost damned if you do and damned if you don't. You know, you're trying to get out here and make it for yourself. You're running over mountains and in between bushes and down thickets, you know, trying to do what they just so, you know, just cavalierly just come in, you know, they come in and do. And I think that the statement from that one TV show is so powerful still, is that I got to do twice as much as everything you do to get half the recognition. And we see it all of the time.
Yeah.
And so I know we are past an hour. I don't know what your guys' time frame is, but I want to ask this question, and maybe this will have to be the last one, and maybe we'll have to come back and revisit this topic, is what role should the church have played in this? Because all we want to do was pray. And listen, I'm a proponent of prayer, right? I know that prayer works, but prayer also gives you strategies. It gives you instructions and things and tips about what you need to do and how you need to move. And I have said this, and I will continue to say, I think that sometimes we, as in this Christian walk, we forget that Christians were also a warring people. God did tell them to go to war a few times, and then he told them to kill everything, right? And I asked a group of Christians this one question. I said, what if after we do all this praying, which I'm not saying that in no sarcastic tone, because I believe in it. I'm a proponent of prayer. But after we do all this praying, what did God say go to war? Are we ready? Will we do it? Are we going to say that this the devil? The devil that told us to go to war. We're going to rebuke the spirit. Maybe God telling us to go to war. And I mean, you know, because for me, one of the things that bothered me, that did bother me about the looting, was that we're not in a position for self-sustenance. We don't have our own grocery stores. We don't have our own clinics yet. We got a few here and there, but in relevance to communities, we don't have a grocery store, a pharmacy, this, that, this in my community, in Auburn, Gresham, in K-Town. We don't have self-sustenance. And so what I began to see was the other white communities, because I talked about it at work. The lady, she lives around out in that Orland Park area, right? So what she told me, which I understood, may not necessarily, I'm indifferent about how I feel about it, but I understood the position. Y'all done looted up and tore up all the jewels in all the Black community. And now they she said, I went to go pick up a couple of avocados that should have just took me 10 minutes to walk in the store, get the avocados, pay for them, and come on out. There's a line that's snaking through the parking lot. And I have to wait out there for over an hour in the store and do a 10-minute run. And she said, you know what? You know who was out there? I said, girl, who? Black people. You see? So then now we come in and please, I don't want anybody, even people that are viewing, to say, well, we can shop anywhere we want. And we can. We absolutely can. And I'm not saying that you should or you can't. I'm saying when you begin to declare war in such a way, you got to be ready and prepared on all fronts for self-sustenance. And we're not. Because they, you know, and what happened in Cicero, what? They want to ban us from coming over there and shopping. And I shop over there just simply because I live on the back of Cicero, right? And that's the grocery store that's closest to me. So that's why I shop there. But then you telling me that now I can't even come over there because I'm black, because I'm finna eat up all y'all food because they tore up all our food. You see? So give me y'all take on that. What was the church? What should we have done?
Pastor, you can start.
I think really the church's role is, as you said, to kind of download the solutions from heaven, right? And to be willing to carry them out. You know what I'm saying? So if you go back to the book of Joshua, right? When the Lord told them to go in and possess the promised land, they did that at the tip of a sword. You know what I'm saying? So Joshua was cutting off the heads of the leaders. I'm not saying that it's necessarily going to look like a violent martial campaign, but we do have to understand capitalism is war. And that's where we lose in the worst. Is, you know what I'm saying? We are not, you know what I'm saying, fighting them on the front lines of capitalism. You know what I'm saying? We sitting back, you know what I'm saying, and we still asking to be fed from the people who have been starving us for 400 years. So I think part of the church's role is to mobilize people and to get people together and have them to really understand the power of the community. Because what has occurred, you've seen every appreciable unit of Black togetherness broken down to the smallest level. So if you looked at us, you know, tribally, tribes got broken up, right? So then after tribes got broken up, clans got broken up. Then after clans got broken up, families got broken up. Then after families got broken up, interpersonal relationships got broken up. So now at the most fundamental level, and even now your relationship with yourself got broken up.
Nice.
Right? So now you went all the way down to that level and you have no concept of unity. You don't have interpersonal unity within yourself. Then you don't have unity with the people who look the most like you, who are the closest to you, the people in your house. Then you ain't got the relationship with the people in your neighborhood. And so that's what church overcame in the earliest days, where regardless of wherever you came from before, we here now. So let's agree on a common language that's going to get us to where we got to go. And at that point, the common language was clearly liberation. We all agreed that we needed to be free. So now we're in a time and space where we don't all agree that we need to be free, because we're not even all aware of the fact that we're still enslaved.
Exactly.
Because we had these various pacifiers, and we have, you know what I'm saying, these various things that lull us to sleep and make us comfortable in our cage. You know what I mean? And so part of the church's role is to remind people, no, fam, we still in cages. And since we still in cages, this is how we behave accordingly to get out and never go back to it. That's the church's job. And so when the church got co-opted by mainstream, you know, prosperity gospels and moved away from liberation and rights to, you know what I'm saying, my personal Cadillac and my personal piece of land as opposed to community land, we start falling off, because you're easier to pick off when you by yourself than you are when you're in a herd. You know what I'm saying? You ever seen in the wild, and they showing these lions and stuff, they go after the separated ones. You don't go and attack the whole herd. You attack the one that's separated from the herd. So now if you created a culture of separation amongst people, now you could pick everybody off whenever you feel like it. You know what I'm saying? Now I think that's what really happened, to undermine the church and to get a whole generation of people to turn away from church, you know what I'm saying, citing all of these inefficacies, because it was agents that was put in the church to break it up. So them my thoughts. We supposed to be getting together, and we supposed to be putting our power together and remembering who we are, and remembering that, you know what I'm saying, when it's 5 of us, we more powerful than when it's 1 of us. When it's 50 of us, we more powerful than when it's 5 of us. When it's 500 of us, we more powerful than when it's 50 of us. And every time we multiply, our power multiplies exponentially. And that's what them folk know. And they don't want us getting together.
Absolutely. Come on, Sean.
In my personal opinion, I think it's the role of the church to, at this particular time, for Black Christians, I'm speaking to Black Christians particularly, I think we need to divest from any form of religious thinking that separates us from our Blackness. I'm going to repeat that. I believe, I'm not prophesying, but I believe we need to divest from any form of religious thinking that separates us from our blackness. And I believe that if we don't, we will be judged for it by God. One of the things, I'm from a Pentecostal background, so all I know is Pentecostal Christianity, from apostolic church to Kojic churches, holiness churches. And blackness I did not grow up in church around the pride of being Black specifically. Now, our culture in church is full of blackness, how we sing, how we express ourselves, charismatic preaching, the fact that we commune and eat together. Those demonstrate how we function as a culture within and without of the church. But however, because we have taken on biblical thinking through the lens of white evangelicals, a lot of our morality is anti-blackness, and it's anti one another. And I think that a lot of Black Christians are struggling right now because within their spirit, because God is sovereign, they know that they're supposed to be doing something.
Yes,
but because of their indoctrination, they don't know what the what is, and they're scared of what the what could be. Because now I have to question, oh my God, does this go up against this? Is this unbiblical? Is this, I was sharing with someone last night about Nehemiah. When he heard his people wasn't doing too good, he went back to help his people reestablish the wall. And when he heard that his enemy had an agenda against his agenda, he prayed for his enemy. But he prayed that the intentions of his enemy against him would be turned right back on them, because it's war, because you're doing it for your people. One of the things that I've learned over the past 3 to 4 years is that I think a lot of times in the Pentecostal background, we think we're exercising our morality through what pleases God. But what actually sustains you in life, as well as a believer, is how you were raised. Who raised you? Who put in you what the right thing and the wrong thing is to do? Those are the things that hold real value. And you can be sitting in a congregation and you're looking at people like, I want to serve God because I want what they got. But you don't know that they're from a 2-parent household. You don't know that they had a grandmother, aunts, a father, uncles who didn't let them go astray. So this is not just a matter of religious practices being put into play. This is also good family structure. And I think that's important, because a lot of times we're fighting these religious ideologies against the dysfunction of our culture. And now we can't afford that fight. Now it don't even matter. Who's sleeping with who? That ain't none of my business. Who's stealing what? Okay, just call the police and report it. Because right now, Black men getting killed for 8 minutes and 46 seconds.
Come on here.
Even Jesus said when they tried to bring up the issue of tithing and getting what they could get, and he told them, you tithe with cumin and myrrh, but guess what? Their weightier matters. And the way we've practiced our faith, we've made the wrong things the weightier matter. Yes, and right now, human life, our ability to have access to our humanity in this country is the weightier matter. So I think the church needs to divest from any form of religious thinking that separates us from our Blackness. I think we need to educate ourselves on our history, take a joy and a passion in that, knowing that that's how we glorify God. He chose us to come here as Black, particularly in America. And I think we need to develop a value around community and family, or family and community. And when I say family, I mean all kinds of families, not just 2-parent households. Because of our dysfunction, we don't have that privilege.
That's right.
We got all kinds of families.
But see, that's the whole thing. Also, I don't want to cut you off, but historically, we was bigger than that. You wasn't just a mama and a daddy. You had about 4 mamas. You had about 6 daddies, and you was everybody's child. You know what I mean? And when you break that up and create this nuclear family, the nuclear family only serves to propagate the American power structure, you know what I'm saying, that they built, you know what I'm saying, during the industrial time. It don't make sense. If we could all get together and we just say, look, the 10 of us is a family. I don't figure it out, but 10 of us is a family. But that means all 10 of us prioritize putting our resources together. All 10 of us prioritize each other's lives. All 10 of us prioritize each other's educations and morality and well-being. However you did that with your grandmama, your auntie, your daddy, your other daddy, your four mamas. I don't care how you did it, but you did it. You know what I mean? And y'all said we are a people. You know what I mean? And it's about people at the end of the day. And that's what America understood, but they was perverse with it. They built this on our backs. It wasn't about skills. It wasn't about labor. It was about people. You had people who could interact with the environment and make it breathe life. We built this country out of the dirt, literally. We literally built this country out of the dirt because that is a gift because God gave us to cultivate and to curate the earth.
Right.
And we can do that naturally. And so them people said, let's exploit that.
Right.
And we don't never figure out it's always been about people and it's always been about our ability to exchange and to build with each other. And that's what we got to get back to.
That's really where I'm coming from too. When you just said it's always been about people. I have a lot of Puerto Rican Christian friends. And when Puerto Rico experienced that hurricane and all that damage, they didn't have to question, okay, wait a minute, is this God? Do I help my people in Puerto Rico? No, because it's always about your people group first. It's always about your culture first. Puerto Ricans understand that. Mexicans, Africans, African-American believers are the only ones who have to stop and question, wait, is this biblical? Should I be doing this? It's who you were birthed through. It's who you are. It's defending your people is a defense for yourself. Building for your people is a building for yourself, for the continuity of the community. So I just wanted to say that.
Hey, you was already killing it. I just had to jump in. You was getting it going.
No, you're right. You're right. I'm with you, brother.
Man, well, we almost at the 2-hour mark, and I know some people don't get tired. You know, some people's attention span ain't that long, but I think this is a dynamic, much needed conversation. I would like to continue this conversation maybe next week or the following week with you guys again, if time willing. If your schedule is available, because I think this is a conversation that we need to continue to have and foster amongst us, because we gotta foster healing. We gotta foster empowerment amongst one another. It's important for our survival right now, because they've been planning for years for this war. They got their militia groups. Their kids been shooting since 5. They got plenty of powdered food. All you gotta do is add water. They got their bunkers set up and built. And we are still at the beginning of the game. We're just now getting our guns. We just now learn to shoot. We ain't even taught our kids nothing yet. We're just now coming to a place so we're not ready. And you know, I just think that God is giving us a time to prepare. But I think these type of conversations need to continue to be had, and not only had, but we need to begin to impact action, some way, shape, form, or fashion, for our people. So I thank you guys for my panelists, Charlom Wilcher, Sherard Jones. Minister Kwame Pitts had to leave. She had another meeting that she had to jump on to, but I thank you guys. I want to invite you back. We'll check schedules to see if it's next week or the following week. But I think this conversation is had. I want you guys to watch the entire 2 hours, because it's worth your time. You won't even know it's 2 hours. I want you to share it, like, comment. I go back, I read the comments, I make comments back to you. So enjoy the rest of your evening, and we will see you next time.
Thanks.